Hello, folks. How are you doing? Kale Zeldin here from the Underneath. Welcome to an afternoon stream. I had great plans of being here with the inestimable Larry Chapp, but Larry has been otherwise indisposed. I'm not sure where he is. So I'll give it a shot. I was really hoping to build off the energy of Larry and his recent trip to the Synod on synodality, the second part of a two-part shindig over in Rome. He was there covering things for Catholic World Report. And of course, to talk about the election that just happened on this past Tuesday. I am not sure if he's going to show up or not, so I'm going to give this a whirl. I don't want to waste your time or bore you. So if I have to end it, I have to end it, and he and I'll just have to do a recording, and I'll upload it like I normally do. But here I am. I'm trying to work the StreamYard. They've got a bunch of fancy new buttons. I'm still yet a pro here, but we will see how it goes. I guess we can talk a little bit about the Synod on synodality. I'll just give my perspective as someone who, is obviously not in Rome. I have been on record as not really being a fan as such. It seemed to me, this outsider, as a little bit of navel gazing, sort of a church talking about being church, strikes me in this time and place as perhaps unhelpful. But from my vantage point, it seemed to be a little bit of a snooze fest. I'm not sure if all of the hot button issues got put off into the discussion groups, these ongoing things. Not really even sure what that means. But as regards the, so anyway, I'll wait for Larry on that. Hello, Zach, how you doing? I am interested, of course, like everybody else. I've been following the election and the aftermath. I'm not one of these people who stay up all night long to watch the returns. I have lost any stomach for those kinds of things. But I was struck when I woke up in the morning. I went to bed at around 11 o'clock. It looked like things were going pretty well for Trump. And sure enough, when I woke up at around 4:30 a.m. the next day, what's going on, Daniel? It seemed to go in sort of everything went in Trump's fashion. Honestly, as I was watching the returns and following things leading up to the election, it just seemed like the momentum and the energy were with Trump. Everything that he does everything that he did in that those closing 2-3 weeks, him personally, I mean, here was just kind of pitch perfect. I thought the stunt at the McDonald's where he kept his tie on and he put his apron on and he made the fries and he salted the fries, and then served the people as they came through the drive-thru. I thought that was incredibly endearing. And for a counter campaign to be going with this guy as Hitler, I think those images really worked against that claim. Just not so sure how serious you can take those kinds of claims when you see this guy acting sort of very humanly, if not a little bit awkwardly and oddly, because he's certainly an odd guy. But it seemed to work. And those images were just so humanizing. I guess that's what I keep going back to. Now, this was in counterpoint to the commentariat, who were all too quick on the Twitter to point out that Trump doesn't really work at McDonald's, and those were not real customers, that they had closed down the restaurant and all of that. Okay, Larry, let me give you the invite. 1 second, Larry. Copy that. I'm going to send it to you on the Gmail there, Larry. Let me see, Larry. This is just link. This is just making good live streaming, right, folks? All right, Larry, I just sent it on to you. You can come on in, and then we will get going with the Synod. But at any rate, the long and short of it for me, I was not terribly surprised when it turned out on Wednesday morning that the American people had elected Trump, not only from the Electoral College standpoint, but even more impressively was the popular vote. I really had no reason to think that that would be the case, but there it was. All right, so Larry is on his way. Larry, let me know if you. There he is. Excellent. All right, how's it going,
All
brother?
right, hang on a second.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I'm just gonna change the look here real quick just to make it a little bit less busy for us.
Wait a minute. Okay, here we go. Here we go. I'm getting a double echo or something here.
Might have something to do with your headphones. How are we doing? Talk. Are you getting double echo?
I don't know. I don't know what's going on. All right, maybe it's okay now.
All right. Yeah. Well, Larry, it's good to see you. I got us off to a slow start, so I apologize. But here we are. Look, I already told the audience.
No, this is I can't. It's crazy. There's something wrong here. I'm getting all kinds of weird feedback or something or other. But anyway,
why don't you log out and come back? I'll hold down the fort. The people can wait. The people can wait.
Hang on. I'm going to back out and come back in. All right. I'm going to back out and come back in.
And here I am. So anyway, the all the energy for me at the end seemed to be going with Trump, not only with the McDonald's stunt, but I thought that the garbage can thing was pretty funny too. The garbage truck. So all right, here's Larry. I'm going to add him to the stage. All right, Larry, you still getting that feedback?
No, I think everything is going to be fine now. So it was something weird going on, I think. But anyway, it's glad to be here. When you sent me the original thing, the StreamYard invite was not included. It just sent me to the YouTube channel, and I'm going, wait a minute, how do I get in here? I heard you talking about me, and I couldn't get in.
Yeah, that's no fun. That's no fun. I know. Well, man, it's great to see you. Of course, coming on here fresh. I wanted to talk to you about two things today. I really wanted to talk about the synod on synodality, and then just the election aftermath. And not that I have anything. As you know, I'm not a professional theologian, nor am I a professional political analyst. But I just really wanted to kind of pick your brain about what you're seeing and hearing, and your reactions to everything going on. So, do you want to do the synod first?
Yeah, I mean, I heard the first part of what you were saying when you thought I wasn't going to be here, and I thought, man, I agree with everything he's saying. I couldn't sum it. It was a snooze fest. It really ended up being, I guess, the cliche these days. It ended up being a big nothing burger. There are those who would disagree with that. There are those who would say, oh no, there's little bombshells thrown in there that are going to explode later on. But look, come on. We're 11 years into the Francis papacy. Yeah. If he was going to give us lady deacons and married priests and contraception and gay marriage and all that, he would have done it by now. The fact is, this Pope is just vexing. He's a mystery. Mm-hmm. He, as I said in something I wrote for First Things, the synod is reflective of this entire papacy in the sense that it provokes and then it retreats. It raises expectations. Oh, we're going to discuss women deacons. Oh, we're going to discuss LGBT inclusion. Oh, we're going to discuss, like in the Amazon Synod, married priests or whatever. And then when push comes to shove, the Pope says, no, we're not going to do any of that. So why are these things even on the table? Why did the Synod raise those expectations? And one got the impression as well that the Pope himself got kind of bored with the synod at the end, because after 3 years of this thing, he's not even going to issue an apostolic exhortation. He just signed off on it and said, so what they said.
Yeah, so I want to ask you about that. I mean, again, I have a pretty diverse audience. Got a bunch of friends from a bunch of different denominations who I think will log in and come and say hello, and they'll put their questions in the chat. By the way, when you do have questions, put a big question mark there so I can see it later on when I scan the comments for questions. But what do you mean this exhortation? Like, what are you talking about? Why did it indicate to you that the Pope just had kind of
almost always when the Pope has a synod of bishops and calls a synod of bishops, and this goes all the way back to Paul VI and John Paul II. When the synod of bishops is done, we must remember that a synod of bishops and this time it included lay people and priests as well. It does not have any decision-making authority. Its role is purely consultative. It is giving the Pope advice and input, at the end of which, therefore, the Pope writes this thing called an apostolic exhortation, which on the level of church authority or church teaching, it's actually below the authority of an encyclical or something. It's a fairly low-level document in terms of how the church views magisterial authority, but it's called an apostolic exhortation. One of the ones a lot of people might be familiar with, Catholics, was when John Paul II held his Synod of Bishops, he issued afterwards an exhortation called Familiaris Consortio, which was, a document on the family.
Yeah,
which became which I mean,
in this church, that's
people still quote familiar. Yeah, people still quote it, and so on. And so, of course, after the Pope Francis had his first synod on the family, he issued the apostolic exhortation Amoris Laetitia, that created a firestorm because
yes, it did. Yes,
it opened the door to divorce and remarried, taking communion, and so on. So, and after every single one, we had a synod on the Amazon, and he issued an apostolic exhortation called Querida Amazonia, and so on. So you get to the end now of this two-part synod, a 3-year-long process that involved this massive amount of listening sessions and lay people involved and all these sorts of things. At the end of this process, we're not going to get an apostolic exhortation. We just got the Pope signing off on the final document and saying, that's magisterium now, which really is a head scratcher. I'm telling you, it is a huge head scratcher, and is
it a head scratcher for people like the two of us who kind of don't have much time for this whole synod and synodality? Was it a head scratcher for those who were sort of very amped up about the process? I mean,
it's a head scratcher for everyone, because the progressive wing of the church, to use these sort of hackneyed taxonomies, but nevertheless, I mean, the progressive wing of the church was definitely looking at the synod as the beginning of a process of opening the church to change in certain fundamental doctrinal areas, such as women's ordination and gay marriage and so on, gay sex and so on. Now, so they were hoping that the Pope would do something with this synod document like he did with the Synod on the Family and Amoris Laetitia, where he would issue an apostolic exhortation and add papal weight to this movement, to this process of change and so on. Of course, the conservative wing of the church was hoping that the Pope would issue an apostolic exhortation that sort of said no to all of those things and reiterated the church's as he did in the document on the synod, where the synod on the Amazonians have wanted to open the door to ordaining married men as priests, and the Pope in his apostolic exhortation said, no, we're not going to do that. He just flat out said, we're not going to do that. And so conservatives are hoping that, this document would put an end to that kind of thing in this synod as well. And so both sides walked away kind of disappointed, like, well, okay, what was this whole process then all about? Why did we just do this? What was
that's a great question. I mean, that's exactly my question, I guess, is like, what was it all for in the end? I for all of the the whinging, me, like, I was like, what's going on? Like, this is, is this some sort of Trojan horse to do a bunch of crazy stuff? And it all, to use, a word that even my kids now would make fun of me for, it's like, it's all just very cringe, isn't it? I mean, the whole circus, it wasn't even impressive. It was just kind of lame. And I don't know. I mean, so if I sort of step back from this process, so nothing happened really. There was conversation, there was chatter. It seems like it was navel gazing type conversation, if I'm being honest, again, from my vantage point. Like, what was it all for? Was it just make work for a bored bureaucracy?
That is a very, very good question. The question of what was this all for? What was this about? One would say, well, it was about the establishing of a process of listening, a process of dialogue, a process of including lay people in decision making and so forth. Okay, so if that's the case, if you're doing something for the sake of establishing a process, all the more reason why you would hope that there would be an apostolic exhortation that would then give us bullet points, in a sense. Here's what the process was. Here's what I hope the process continues to be moving forward. So there was no retrospective from this Pope saying, here's what I think this was all about. And then no prescription for here's where I hope we now go. So even on the level of the Synod is simply establishing a process, is left like a hanging chad.
I remember that.
Yeah. And a hanging chad without resolution, because there was no apostolic exhortation, no further papal direction of any kind. And apparently we're not going to get any further pay. So really, we don't even, Cale, and you know this, you'll chuckle at this, we still don't even have a definition of what synodality is, right?
Right. Yeah, that's what's striking to me. And I the image that popped into my head as you were talking about this, it reminds me a little bit of Lucy holding the football and telling Charlie Brown that now you can come and kick the ball. I really will keep it down now so you can really kick the ball now. And it doesn't seem to be particularly reserved for, more traditional oriented Catholics or progressive oriented Catholics. It just seems to be that this is kind of what he does.
Yeah, it's almost as if this is a game, right?
Well, it feels that way, and so for me, it just strikes me as rather frivolous. And to me, you erect a structure like this, and you set up a structure like this, and you go through the process of, think about I hate to boil it down to something so crass as money, but think about the expenditure, the resources that were spent.
Millions,
for this whole event.
Millions of euros.
Exactly. And Larry, I've been thinking a lot about this, because I feel like for me, I'm of two minds about things. Like, I get, I get the institutional church, and I understand, what institutions are for and why you need them, and all of this. But I wish that people in authority would listen to, I'm not against listening. I'm not against, being seen and being heard as an adult Catholic. I'm not at all. And yet I didn't even get there in my own head, because it didn't really seem to be about that anyway. You know what I mean by that?
I know exactly what you mean. When I was in Rome for 3 weeks covering this thing, and I ran across a sister, a nun, who works in Rome, Irish, but she works in Rome.
Yeah.
And she was picking my brain about the Synod and so forth. And she said she was in a position, I don't want to give her name away or where she works, where she said that, she talks to all kinds of people, all walks of life.
Yeah.
And she would ask people randomly, do you know anything about the Synod on synodality? And if you do, what do you think of it? And she goes, almost every single Catholic she ran across in Rome, when she didn't even know what the Synod on synodality was.
In Rome.
This is in Rome. These are Catholic pilgrims in Rome.
Right.
At the time that the Synod was actually taking place, had no idea that it was taking place or even what it was. And, once in a while she'd run across a Catholic who knew, I've heard of this Synod thing. Now, and we all have anecdotal stories that are very similar, right? Where we all know Catholics, and you talked about the Synod. It's like, oh yeah, big yawn fest. So the question then is, all right, the average Catholic doesn't give a rat's fig, let's put it this way, about this. So what exactly, you brought up the issue, listening. The Synod and synodality was about listening to whom and to what end? Who was being listened to?
And about what, right?
And about what? It was also vague, ill-defined. The listening sessions worldwide garnered 1%. 1% of the total Catholic population worldwide participated in the synodal listening sessions. Actually, it was less than 1%.
Yeah. That's just amazing, right? And I'd say this, the concept of a remote leadership class listening to the people over which they govern is a good thing. Right.
Yeah, it's excellent idea.
I think that people in charge should listen to the people they rule over, for lack of a more sophisticated way to say it. And yet, I never once felt that that's what this really was about.
Well, yeah, because how could you? I mean, this is an institution of 1.2, 1.3 billion people scattered all over the world. And the idea that 300 some people were going to meet in Rome a couple of Octobers in a row to pore over the curated tabulations of random opinions drawn from 0.9% of the Catholic population of 1.2 billion all over the world
Yeah.
was going to give us a representative sampling of what Catholics really thought about anything. It's just absurd on the face of it, especially in light of the fact that the church did not avail herself of proper sociological experts on here's how you devise poll questions.
Right.
Here's how you devise proper, scientifically vetted and tested, time-tested methods for polling people. No, you probably saw some of the questions that people were asked. Today, how did you feel the Holy Spirit speaking to you today? Did you feel synodally moved by the Holy Spirit? I mean, come on, give me a break.
Right. And so again, the feel for me, and I know I have to go with that because that's sort of where I'm operating. The feel of it for me is just a real unseriousness, a kind of institutionalized unseriousness. It's frivolous. It just seems frivolous. It's like it doesn't seem in any way, shape, or form to be
right
worth the time. And so why, Larry, is our church engaged in what just strikes me as ultimately meaningless and frivolous activity?
Well, all this leads me to circling back to our original question of what was this all for?
Mm-hmm.
Why did we not get an apostolic exhortation from the Pope and so on? To me, the entire thing was staged and curated and set up in advance to give the optics of democracy. This is what progressives always do. They love to engage in the optics of a faux democratic process in order to manipulate it behind the scenes in order to reach foregone conclusions that they want to reach. So I do believe that those who organized the synod, and the Pope included, wanted it to be a process that showed that there was a groundswell of synodal support for these changes to church teaching. And when the synod actually happened, and there was large-scale blowback and pushback by the synodal participants against female deacons, against granting doctrinal authority to Episcopal conferences. We have to talk about that. Against the LGBTQ steamroller. When the majority of synod participants pushed back against all of that, I think the synod organizers said, well, we have failed. We failed. Obviously, the ruse has been seen through. The optics didn't work. We're not going to get the groundswell we wanted. And so I think the Pope just retreated and said, well, to hell with this. Here, we'll sign off. Off we go with it. The Pope didn't get out of this what he wanted. And so he backed away from it and just essentially assigned it to the dustbin of history, which is where it's going to end up.
So, Larry, have you ever been through an accreditation process?
Yes, I was actually the co-chair of our self-study for middle states. We do middle states.
Yeah, so I've been through a couple of them in my time. I've been, as a rank and file teacher, I've been through it as an administrator. I've been through it, beyond it. It could be a process in which information is sort of sourced up the chain to the people who are in positions where they can activate or establish some sort of action plan based upon the intel that they have sourced through the process. I mean, it's possible, but oftentimes it is an exercise in bureaucratic stamping of preordained conclusions.
Yes.
And I don't get my knickers in a twist about these kinds of things. It's sort of like what you have to do. I'm trying really hard in my 50s not to get, all worked up about everything all the time. And so, like, whatever, you kind of do it, and occasionally it'll sort of, strike you as like, man, this is really dumb, but you know what? It's just got to make the donuts. Let's just sort of get the thing through. And I wonder if maybe it's sort of one mediocre circus too much
Yeah,
for me.
I like that. I like that. And
It's like again, in theory, it would be great for the laity to be able to tell their parish administrators, who could tell their pastors, who could tell their bishops and chancery offices, who could tell the cardinals, who could tell, Vatican, Rome, to tell the Pope kind of what's really going on. But what's interesting to me is in the middle of this whole synodal process. Let's just take it for good faith, just for the sake of this conversation. In the middle of this synodal process, which is meant to have a church that is a listening church, and we change how we do church, and all those weird neologisms that they have now for
how do we be
church.
church?
How do we be church, and all that kind of stuff. What's going on in the background is terribly disturbing from a church governance standpoint. You have honestly, this is no longer just like a Boston problem or a U.S. church problem. I mean, you have real issues with real bad stuff going on with the sexual abuse crisis that seems to be not getting any better, and the implications just keep going further and further up the chain. And so is part of what is being accomplished with the synodal process a kind of bait and switch, a kind of watch my hand over here while this hand does something? Like, it just strikes me that way.
It struck me that way too, and it's something that I've thought about long and hard, because the elephant in the living room is the sex abuse crisis. We still have the ongoing drama of Father Rupnik
Yep.
that has been resolved, and various other accusations brought against clerics that Pope Francis has favored, and so on. And so it does almost seem like, okay, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Right. Instead, look at the flaming head and and the pyrotechnics of the synod. And in reality, it does seem like a bit of a bait and switch. In fact, I sort of wrote. I had an article in Catholic Report in which I said, "Rome synodals while the world burns."
Yeah, I love that phrase. It's a great tag.
Because I mean, look at all the crises inside and outside of the church faces. Yeah. Look at all of them. And seriously, I mean, even something that I've said this over and over and over again, one of the most festering issues in the church since the council is liturgy. It continues to fester. It's an issue that divides, and yet it is on the most important thing in the church, our Eucharistic celebration, with one of the central sacrament other than baptism of the church as such, which constitutes the local church. And it divides us. We could really use, why not have a synod on liturgy?
Wow.
Wouldn't that be awesome? A synod of bishops on the liturgy, where just like Lady Deacons is an open question, apparently. Why not have synodal committees devoted to the question of reforming the reform of the liturgy?
That's settled, Larry. That's settled. Stop. It's settled.
Yeah. That's settled.
It's always 1968. Shut up, Larry.
Yeah. I mean, we can't possibly relitigate that case. That's not open. That's not open, even though that is an issue. Okay, so and then we could talk about do a synod of bishops on the sex abuse crisis, which would be unbelievable. I mean, that would be unbelievable.
But I mean,
or how about a synod? Let me throw one more thing. How about a synod of bishops on modern unbelief and atheism?
Right. My goodness, that really would be Vatican III, wouldn't it? I mean, But to your point, Larry. This is like, that would be fireworks, and that would be the conversation worth having. But in order to do that, it seems to me that the people who are in charge of the stuff, the thing, the people in charge of the church, would have to put skin in the game in such a way that I just don't think that they're prepared to do.
No, exactly.
Right?
You know what? Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No.
I often think, for example, one of the problems with modern like print journalism,
Yep.
people who write for the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever, is you hire somebody fresh out of journalism school and all they've studied is journalism. And then you put them in charge of various topics over which they have no expertise because they're all about process. I know all the tools of journalism, but I don't know anything about the specifics of the topic that I've been assigned, whether it's religion or politics or health or whatever. Better to hire somebody who's got a PhD in health science to write your health section, or know something about opera to write your opera section, rather than okay, you get my point. So this is how I view Synod on synodality. We need to be talking about. We need to bring in experts to the Synod to talk about modern atheism or liturgy or the sex abuse crisis that are experts in these things and let them have at it. Instead, we have a Synod about process, about method, about journalism, all right, if you will. So we never get down to brass tacks. In other words, if you really want to listen to people talk about stuff they care about and know about.
Yeah.
Not about this vague synodal. Anyway, I'm so boxy now.
Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of like if you and I are we need 10 writers, right? We recognize that there's a dearth of writers that we need to do, and instead of teaching them anything, we say, okay, get Microsoft Word, and then I'm going to give you a 30-minute tutorial on how to work the buttons. It's like like that's not getting to the meat of the thing, right? And what strikes me is that this is a pattern that you see replicated in a bunch of different realms, right? And so, we see this same thing. We're talking here about the church, but we're seeing the same thing across multiple categories. You think about the consulting class, right? Again, the same kind of thing. Kids are hired right out of college to consult, and what always makes me chuckle about that is that what exactly are they consulting over? Like, where's the wisdom in the thing? And
where's the insight?
Right? Where's the insight? And we seem to have this weird burrowing out of this middle space, this middle class. I don't mean it in sociological terms, but this middle place where you've got a bunch of really old people, right, and you've got a bunch of really young people, and there's nobody in the middle that is being sourced. You hate using that word, but sourced for any kind of insight on anything. And and I just see this replicating across multiple vectors, multiple institutions. And somebody in the chat just says, we just wishing for great leaders? Well, yeah, like in a way, I kind of am looking for great leaders. I'm looking for wise leaders. I'm looking for moral leaders. I'm looking for people who are not afraid. So yes, I think that that's part of the game. And it just seems to me that this is there's a certain way in which a bureaucracy becomes immune to greatness. Right, that bureaucracy becomes kind of a place where the good and the great go to die, or something like that. And I just look at it, just shake my head. You mentioned liturgy. You mentioned the sex abuse crisis. You mentioned unbelief. Well, my goodness, those are three things that are kind of important, because those orient us, right? Deal with the conditions of belief and unbelief, and show us how to participate in a vision oriented toward Christ, right? It's like, it's remarkable to me that instead we're going to sort of establish a listening session in which we're going to retread grievances from the 60s and the 70s. And I'm not like for sexism. I'm not for any of those isms that get brought up. But it's like, that's not what's wrong. What's wrong with the church are not those things. It just seems so patently clear to me. And what we need is we need to give people a reason to believe and a reason to participate. And it seems to me that we give them neither of those.
None of that stuff. And if you look at, we're the best and the brightest invited to the Synod in terms of bishops and lay people and so forth. For example, from the American delegation, the Vatican selected this young woman who, like 22 years old, I can't remember her name now, but she stood up in one of the listening sessions, apparently talked about how her She had a relative that committed suicide somewhere in Poland because she was gay and she was persecuted and so on and so forth. So she gets sent to the synod to be a voting member of the synod. Well, it turns out that the story that she told was false.
Bullshit. Yeah.
It was BS, and it was shown to be BS, and yet she's still there this year back at the synod.
I mean,
as a voting member.
In my world, that's called a liar, right?
Yeah, she is. Well, she was shown to be a liar, and yet I'm not going to mention a name or whatever.
Yeah, don't
because my sources that tell me all this, they're confidential sources. But nevertheless, it's a true story. All right, but that's the kind of person that is voting on whether or not to change church teaching on LGBTQ plus EIEIO.
In theory, Larry.
All right. Now, so the point is bureaucracy. You talked about how bureaucracies tend to they're self-replicating and self-preserving. There's another thing. Bureaucracies have a tendency to dumb things down.
Yeah.
To dull the knife's edge.
Right.
And I will add one more thing. And this is an interesting point, I think. With the 60-year-long now vocations crisis and the diminishment in the numbers of priests, which means there is a diminished number of people to choose from to become bishops. My point is the talent pool that the church has to choose from for her leaders is getting shallower and shallower and shallower.
Right.
I mean, 70 years ago, it was possible to find a Karol Wojtyła, a Joseph Ratzinger, and so forth to become a bishop. Those types are getting fewer and fewer because there are literally 1/5 the number of priests and so forth to choose from in the world today. So I would throw this out there. One argument that I would put forward in favor of the idea that the church should allow married men to become priests is that you now increase the talent pool.
Yeah.
You increase the pool from which to choose your priests. Because the church is always going to be oriented sacramentally around the priesthood. Her leaders are always going to be oriented around the episcopacy. And therefore, it is of monumental importance that we choose our best and our brightest to lead us in these. Now, I'm not here saying, let's have married priests. I'm saying we need to do something to increase vocations so that the talent pool is increased as well.
Well, okay, let me ask you about that because, admittedly, I've been all over the map about this issue.
I have too, man. Trust me.
Yeah, I've been all over the map.
Oh, look, I'm a laicized deacon.
No,
I didn't become a priest because I wanted to get married.
Yeah.
And yet I've been a strong supporter of mandatory celibacy. But still, it's a question.
Yeah. So my question is, and I don't want to, what I'm about to say now is not what I want to happen. I just want to make that clear. But when you look at the logic of story and the logic of narrative, when a child never feels the implications of poor choices, the child runs the risk of never learning that when I do this thing, I skin my knee. When I do this thing, I break my ankle. When I do this thing, I run the risk of, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
It's like, and so you have, using this as a metaphor, I almost want to think that we have to go through this radical, shrinking, harrowing process because we have been wandering in the desert for 40 years and many of us are just never going to get it.
Yeah.
I'm talking corporate language,
bodily
language, right? And I was thinking about Moses and having them wander around the desert for 40 years and why? Like what is this thing going on? And it's almost like we need to learn the lessons that we have not learned. And and again, this is 2024. So I know I'm already, in scary territory, but I don't think we've learned the lesson yet. And, we might shrink down a lot like more, even
Yeah.
in very faithful places. You know, my brother is 2 months out from being ordained a transitional deacon, and he'll be ordained a priest in the spring in the Diocese of Baton Rouge. And I don't know if you've ever been down to the Diocese of Baton Rouge and Louisiana
No.
in general, but it's a very faithful part of the country. You know, that's where I'm from. And church participation still remains very high. And, you know, there's energy and there's all of that. And yet still, in the next 2 years, you know, my brother will be part of, you know, they're retiring 6 priests, I think, this year, or they're up for retirement in the next year. And
Yeah.
he and another guy they didn't have any ordained this past year. And my brother, who's 50, and a young guy are being ordained here in the spring. You know, do the numbers, it's just not enough, right? And so even in a place like Baton Rouge, which still, you know, contrary to a lot of the other places in the country, still has a culture that admires priests and looks up to priests. You know, this is not Boston. You know, this is not New York City. This is not this is a much more sort of churchy place, and they don't have enough priests. And you know, you start to have to ask the question, right? And so anyway, I'm sorry, let me get back to you in just a second, but
It's okay.
in order to be a priest, it seems to me, you have to be very comfortable with the notion that calling is sacrifice. And we seem to live in a world, this is not a surprise, you and I have actually talked about this. We live in a world that does not understand that sacrifice and vocation are kind of the same thing.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's why I share with you this feeling of a pruning is taking place. And that's why I'm back and forth on the idea of a married clergy, because in some sense, ordaining married men, is that not simply raising the white flag to modern culture and say, yeah, okay, world, you're right, we need to let our priests get married. And
Right.
it would be like fingernails on a chalkboard, actually, to me, to say, well, let's just get rid of mandatory celibacy. But we do need to think about the idea that the church might be going through its 40 years in the desert. My friend Marcus Grodi talks about, that, the pattern of Israel is the pattern of the church.
Right.
Israel was risen, brought up by God, was called by God. And you see David, and then David sins, and Israel sins, and Israel falls in. God, in a sense, pulls back, and Israel shrinks. Israel goes through a purgation, recovers its roots, and then comes back. And maybe that's probably what the church is going through.
Well,
now.
I think that's true. So the question is, well, why, and what should the response to the of the church be? It doesn't seem that the church has any answer at all to it, right?
I guess my experience is that, going back to the synod and synodality and the discussion of bureaucracies and what bureaucracies do, and then my own experience in the seminary is, this is going to, I say this with all due respect to my friends who are priests and bishops, and I know many, and many of them are excellent, fantastic, heroic men. They're my heroes. Nevertheless, my experience is that as a group, the priestly class of the Catholic Church is a mediocre class of people.
Okay.
In terms of intellectual ability, in terms of depth of theological, philosophical, historical, literary sense, of a humanistic sort of soul with wisdom and insight and power. Well, this is why so many homilies are just atrocious, just so dull, so boring. Nemo dat quo non habet. You cannot give what you do not have. So many priests and bishops haven't cracked open a book in decades. Okay, because we're busy. You want to see busy? Go and see a married person with kids. I'll show you busy. I'm sick and tired of that busy excuse. Okay. I'm getting really hot under the collar about this now, because the Catholic faithful deserve homiletics that are high caliber. We deserve priests and bishops that are men of intellectual and theological substance, not simply brick and mortar guys concerned about asphalting the parking lot and paying for that. To hell with that. If you
Right.
can't homilize, you're not going to have people parking in that parking lot before long. Okay, so we need to really, really, and I say this once again with all due respect to all the seminarians and priests that I know that are men of high intellectual caliber and deep, but I think those listening who listen to me know exactly what I'm talking about, because they rub shoulders with brother priests and brother seminarians who disparage the intellectual life, who disparage theology, who disparage doctrine and truth and all of these things as yesterday's preoccupations.
So what instead of what? I mean, if that's
What?
not important, like what is important then?
Well, what is important is accompaniment and being with people, and Monte Carlo nights to raise money, and visiting people, and all that, and those are all good pastoral activities. Don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about having priest scholars in an ivory tower doing nothing but reading books and preparing their homilies. And priests are busy; they're super busy. But we're all super busy. You don't think I'm not busy? For crying out loud, you're busy. You're busy. I'm busy. We're all busy. And yet we have to be about paying attention to what the central focus of our vocation is in the midst of our busyness. I know a good priest, my friend, Father John Gribowich, priest of the Diocese of Brooklyn, always makes time to pray every day, no matter how busy he is, because he understands that unless I pray an hour a day, at least an hour a day, I'm not going to have any gas in my tank to give to my people and so forth. And yet, I wonder how many priests. Anyway, I don't want to get on an anti-priest rant here.
No.
They have their problems, and the lay people are as much to blame as the priesthood and so on. Because when priests then do preach with substance, I guess a lot of lay people complain and blah blah blah. So, but it's just to me, a perception I have when I read comments from like Cardinal Hollerich of Luxembourg, who's the general later of the Synod, who gave an interview 2 years ago in which he said the church needs to change its teaching on homosexuality because it's just wrong. He said, because it's not based in proper science, and he didn't, and blah blah blah. And you sit back and you realize that is such an incredibly shallow thing to say for a man that the Pope has tapped on the shoulder and said, I want you to head the Synod. Such an not just a shallow thing to say, an incredibly stupid thing to say. So we have a stupid man running the Synod. This is my point. An intellectually dumb dullard running the Synod on synodality. Why? That's the best we could do? Right. Are you serious?
Yeah, you just anticipated my questions. Like, this is our best. This is what we can do. And so for whatever reason, the selection process has failed to yield excellence on the way up. In fact, it seems like the selection process has suppressed excellence and instead selected for mediocrity. And I don't know how to address that. Maybe that's just human nature. Maybe that's just sort of what we're dealt with. But man, that just seems deeply unsatisfying to say that out loud.
Yeah, it does. And yet it has to be said out loud. Why does someone like a Bishop Barron, I know people have issues with Bishop Barron, this, that, or the other thing. I'm good friends with him. I'm just full disclosure. But why his meteoric rise? Why does he stand out like a sore thumb? I mean, I don't mean to embarrass him or put him in a bad light with his other bishops, when Larry Chapp says Bishop Barron is better than other bishops. But why does he stand out? Because he's smart. Because he's educated, because he's articulate, right? And he took all of those gifts and talents and turned it into this thing, that is changing the church. Where are he's one guy.
Yeah. So, you said something earlier, are we over intellectualizing things by saying, oh, well, our priests and our bishops don't read? Well, now, I have my own opinion about it, just full disclosure, but I just want to pick your brain a little bit about that. Maybe play a little devil's advocate here. It's like, well, why do we need shepherds who read, Larry?
We need shepherds to read because we need shepherds to understand Lectio Divina. In other words, not reading for the sake of intellectual, prowess, reading for the sake of spiritual depth and growth, to read the scriptures, to pray the scriptures, and then to read texts of theology, philosophy, literature, and so forth, to put flesh on those bones. In other words, if the central point of the scriptures is the incarnation of God in Christ, and the scriptures are to be interpreted forwards and backwards by that fulcrum that is the incarnation of God in Christ, then that means all of human history is that as well. And therefore, to understand Christ, one needs to understand a full range of intellectual disciplines. And so to flesh, like I said, to put flesh on those bones, you need to be able to preach from what you know and what you have. And you cannot raise people up into the light of Christ, into sanctity, into Christified living, if you don't know what that is, and if you haven't studied it. And it's not simply good enough. I mean, it is good enough in a sense. If you have the soul of a John Vianney or a Therese Lisieux, a simple soul that sort of knows connaturally, inchoatively, intuitively, the basic truths of the faith that are there in nuce inside of you, that then flourish because of your humbleness and your prayer life. That's great. You're a saint. All right. But for most priests and lay people like myself, who was a teacher, you're a teacher, who aren't saints, instead of having a sort of connatural ability to articulate the things of God via the pathway of grace and sanctity, I needed to read stuff, okay, in order to know what the heck I was talking about. How, anyway, I'm ranting and raving.
No. So this is good. So, naturally, Augustine pops into my head, take and read, right? And I of course agree. I think that reading is absolutely essential, and I want to say, except for certain carve outs like you put out there with Lisieux and Saint Jean Vianney and others, of course, but not a lot of not many others. For the rest of us, we have to shoulder the responsibility of growing in wisdom and grace. And it seems to me that if you are going to take your role seriously as a priest, sure, but as an adult, right, you don't have the option of not deepening and broadening your base of wisdom. And I've written a couple of Substacks about this, but I fear that another looming crisis is that we don't read anymore. We collectively, as human beings, as a civilization. And what are the implications of that from your perspective? I mean, have you seen that? Have you witnessed that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, I noticed over the 20 years that I was teaching, from year one in 1994, I could presume that most of my students would read the text that I assigned to them. By the time I retired in 2014, I could not assume that at all, that students had simply ceased to read what had been assigned to them to read, that they refused to do so. And I'm told by my former colleagues who still teach at university, it's even gotten exponentially worse. Then you look outside of the classroom into broader society, and you realize that this thing here, which we all have, has people do read on their various devices, but it's the medium is the message, and it's a different kind of reading.
It is.
It's a different kind of reading that alters the way you think. When you read little snippets on X or little snippets on Facebook, or somebody sends you a little YouTube meme or something, that's going to be, how many people are going to be willing to sit down and watch, say, Cale Zeldin do an hour-long thing on Dante, or Larry Chapp do an hour-long thing on Jansenism, as I did today with Sean Blanchard. I've got I don't know what it is, 3,000, 5,000 subscribers or whatever. So there are people out there that would have the attention span, but not many. Many. So the consequence is a priest has got to be able, and this is the point, to lead people into the life of the mind. Into the life of the mind.
I do think it's important. It's not luxury or something. I get in these conversations and I worry, people was like, oh, Cale, you're sort of over intellectualizing this sort of thing. And I don't think I am. I don't think I am, and I need to find a better way to articulate this, right? Because my concern is that, when I grew up, and I would say that it was modeled to me that one should aspire to be well read.
Right? Yes.
And what I'm finding, though, as I get older, is that I know a decent amount of people who were past tense, were well read, but they're not well reading.
Good point.
And you know, of course I worry about that myself. I've got my own little device here, and I, you know me, I love the Twitter. And you know, so I really am trying to make it a habit of being, to make myself read a book, and as often as possible to make myself read a physical book, because you know, when you know, like today I was teaching the Miller's Tale with my kids, and one of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, and it's a totally bawdy, vulgar, hilarious sitcom,
Yeah.
basically written in 1380 or whatever it was, and it's absolutely hilarious. But you know, I have this copy that I've been using now for, gosh, probably the better part of a decade plus now, and one year I wrote in pencil, and one year I wrote in a green pen, and one year I wrote in a red pen, and one year I wrote in a blue pen, and one year, and so there's this sort of this layer on layer, and there's just something really peculiar, when I pick up this book, and in certain senses, I'm picking up history, my
Yeah.
history,
Your history.
right,
Your history.
I'm tapping
Oh,
myself back into a Kale from last year, and a Kale from 2 years ago, and a Kale from 10 years ago. And it really does something to me. And I'm not really sure what that is. What
all right. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the fact is, we're not being just anti-technology Luddites here.
Right.
There is something about this. I just have in my hand, for example, Hans von Balthasar's Theologic, Volume 2, Truth of God, something I, of course, had to read 30 years ago when I was doing my doctoral dissertation. And I'll hold it up here, and you can see my little underlines, my little notes. I wrote key. Oh, this is key. This is key. And more notes over here. You get the point. And yet you're absolutely right. I go back and I see in the places where I've reread this text, different notes and different things. And it's so fascinating for me to go back and look at how my own mind has changed over 30 years based on what I thought was important 30 years ago, as opposed to what I thought was important now.
So this might be worth an essay. But when I typically use the phrase, like, one must cultivate the life of the mind, right? You sort of have that phrase. And what I've always taken that to mean is that one should, as part of one's life, you should cultivate your mind, right? But what I'm realizing buried in that phrase, if you listen to the words, if you listen to the language, that I need to make sure that my mind has life, right? And so therefore I'm also, my mind, and again, we're integrated beings, and I don't want to sort of pull this, but my mind has had a life and continues to have a life, and it's not data. Right. My mind is not, it's not data. It's rather, it's a life.
And that's why the Synod to me was so frustrating, because it's in the shallow end of the pool. It's skirting the surface of things. I'm always asking, go deeper. In other words, where is the sapientia? Where is the 2,000-year wisdom tradition of the church? Well, I'm not asking that lay people or priests or bishops be people that have read everything and are ensconced in their libraries all day long, because as Catholics we read for depth, not necessarily breadth. Okay, and so you can master a single great book, a single great text, and it will take you into, and it will become your guide, your lodestar, your North Star. And you will come back to that book or two books over and over and over and over. And it will then give you a pedagogy for going deeper and deeper and deeper into the spiritual life. And there's a great book, a tiny little book that makes this point, written by a Dominican long since dead, Sertilange, a Frenchman, a Dominican. And it's I think the book is called The Life of the Mind.
Yeah, I have it back here. Yeah.
Isn't it a great book?
Yeah, it's a great book. Yeah.
I read it like 40 years ago. It's about yay thick. I would recommend it to anybody, because he makes this very point. That a priest needs to be a person that guides people into the life of the mind so that they can put on the mind of Christ, that their mind can be transformed. The goal is sanctity, the sapientia of the church. And that's why a priest must be a man of the mind, a person of the mind.
Yeah, and when, I should say, when a priest is not, you can really tell, man. You can really tell. You can
Yeah.
really tell that this is a person who is not deep. And what I'm finding is that when I don't read, when I go through a period of time, either I'm busy with this, that, and the other, or I'm distracting myself, or I'm in a bad spot, and all those kinds of things, it closes up, right? The space that you're
Yeah.
working with, right? It closes in if I don't actively keep this
Yeah.
thing broadening and deepening out, and there's this shrinking and narrowing that occurs when I don't
Yeah.
do it. Now look, I believe that you can fill that in very real ways with listening to podcasts and listening to books on tape, right? So I don't want to say that it's just reading, and but man, there is something just peculiar about the fact of a book, the history
Absolutely.
of a
Yeah.
book, even if it's not filled with underlinings and all that kind of stuff, but just that there's just really something incarnate about that
Yeah,
process that
exactly.
I just
Incarnation.
don't find in the other ways.
Oh, I agree.
I listen to some great podcasts. I listen to some great things on tape. But if I really want to wrap my mind around it, to wrap my hands around it, if I really want it to broaden me out, if I really want it to stick, it has to be physical in a strange sort of way.
Yeah. There's still no, and I think they're going to make a comeback. There's no
Yeah.
substitute for physical books.
Yeah.
I think that are there any chat questions that people have?
Yeah, we are. So let me. I'll put one question, but I do want to talk a little bit about the election. If you've got some, do you have a little
Oh
time?
yeah,
Or
yeah. I
yeah,
do.
yeah,
I do. I do. I
yeah.
do.
All right. So I got a question from Jacob Fowler. Gosh.
Oh, Jacob. Hi, Jacob.
Yeah. So 20 minutes ago, he says, supposing one finds a doctrinal state. I can do this. Watch. Supposing one finds a doctrinal statement in an official synod doc, would that carry magisterial weight, or would it be akin to reading a doctrinal statement put out by a group of lay theologians? Now, before you answer, Larry, I want you to explain why Jacob is asking this question, because up until 2 years ago, a synod in the Catholic Church meant one thing, and all of a sudden it didn't mean that one thing. So
Yeah,
go
Cardinal
ahead.
Mueller made this point. Cardinal Mueller made the point that synod of bishops meant a synod of bishops. Bishops have apostolic authority to teach, not lay people.
Right.
And so Cardinal Mueller criticized the current synod and said it's more like a theological symposium than it is a true synod. And therefore, it raised this question. However, once the Pope, to answer Jacob's question directly, it doesn't matter. Once the Pope signs off on it and
Okay.
says, this is magisterial teaching, it becomes magisterial teaching, whether it came from a group of lay theologians or a mixture of lay theologians and bishops. The deliberations of the synod created a final document that the Pope put his signature to and said, enter this in, this is magisterial. And so it's the question then isn't, is it magisterial? It is. The question is, at what we call in theology, what theological note is it? Is it of a high theological note, high authority, or a relative? I would argue it's a very, very low theological note, as I said earlier. And
Well,
apostolic,
Larry,
and go ahead.
somebody would then say, well, isn't that convenient for you, Larry? Right.
Well, it is convenient, and because it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to give voice to the
if I thought for 1 second that it had high magisterial authority, I would say so, and say we have to contend with that now. That oh my God, this is darn near an infallible statement, and we got to wrestle with it. No, it's not.
Right.
Apostolic exhortations are already low-level magisterial documents, and we didn't even get that.
Yeah.
And so the question of what the magisterial authority is, it's boy, that, and so Jacob's question is a good one.
Yeah. All right, I got another one from JT, and then we can move on to another sclerotic institution. Anyway, who can call a synod? I remember the South Park episode when they called shenanigans. I'm picturing a synod of the laity along those lines, non-magisterial, of course. What do you make of JT's question?
But thank you for quoting South Park. I know
Yeah,
South Park is vulgar and all
we
those
love
sorts
it.
of things, but
So is the Miller's Tale. So is the
it's
Miller's
a
Tale.
guilty pleasure of mine, South Park. It is cringe sometimes, but
Yep.
yeah. But anyway, officially, I mean, a synod can only be called by the Pope or by a group of bishops or by a bishop. Lay people cannot just get together and say, oh, we're going to hold a synod. I mean, you can hold lay people can organize, self-organize, and say, hey, everybody, let's meet at the Knights of Columbus Hall on
Right.
the following nights, and we're going to have a big open-ended discussion, at the end of which we're going to create a document and we're going to send it to the bishop.
Right.
Well, you can call that whatever you want. But in terms of canon law, no, it's not a synod of the church. No. That has to be called by a bishop. I mean, we've all had experience, right? If your local bishop has a diocesan synod, and that's because the bishop calls it.
All right. So I want to tack. There's no artful way to get there, so we're just going to change topics here for the last bit here. Donald Trump just got reelected. He's the 45th president of the United States of America, and now
47th.
Now
he will be, yeah.
And now he will be the 47th president of the United States of America, assuming that he's still around by the time January rolls around. But I'm sort of joking, but maybe not really. What do you make of that is sort of my first question. And secondly, what do you make of the Catholic commentariat on the Synod of on the election of Donald J. Trump? So go ahead, just your sort of your sense of it. What happened for you?
Oh, my sense of it is I'm not surprised that Donald Trump won. I thought that he would win. I had a very just sort of gut level feeling that he would win. I am in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
and
Mr. Swing State. All right,
yeah. And I didn't believe for 1 second the polls that showed that it was neck to neck. If you drive around anywhere in Pennsylvania outside of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, it was Trump sign after Trump sign after Trump sign after Trump sign everywhere. You talk to people at grocery stores and Trump.
Yeah.
I knew Trump was going to take Pennsylvania. Therefore, I knew, based on the polling, and then based on what happened in 2016 and to an extent in 2020, I thought to myself, the polls and the pollsters are liars. They've got they have their thumbs on the scale for a reason. They have to make this seem as if Kamala Harris had momentum when in fact she didn't, in order to make it a horse race that it wasn't, to give people hope. I mean, if Trump came out 53% to her 46% or whatever in the polls, that people are going to give up and say that's it for Kamala. So one of the things that really, I'm not a huge Donald Trump fan. I'm just going to say that up front. I'm not I'm not a never Trumper. I'm not a Trumper. I just, I'm a Dorothy Day Catholic worker guy. The Leviathan of the modern state to me is an abomination. And it doesn't matter who's president, there's going to be a deficit of Christian vision involved. Let's put it that way. And so I have deep ambivalence towards the election of Donald Trump. On the other hand, his election pleases me in one sense, is that it pisses off all the right people. I have to say, I'm not a huge Trump fan, but I'm probably even less a fan of the Democrats and Kamala Harris and everything that they stand for. And they are, I mean, let's face it, she's anti-Catholic. And you know what? If it's okay for African Americans to vote self-interest, and if it's okay for Latinos to vote self-interest, okay, and that's the identity politics of today. Why is it wrong for Catholics to vote self-interest? Why is it wrong for a Catholic to say Kamala Harris is an anti-Catholic bigot, and she is, and therefore I'm happy she lost.
Well,
I'm not happy Trump won, but I'm happy that she lost. That's my point.
No. I totally get where you're coming from. I find it fascinating. I can kind of understand both positions, or I can understand this position, yours. I don't like him. Not my favorite. I'm sort of skeptical of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But a vote for him is a stay against the machine, the Leviathan.
It's a rear guard action.
Yeah. So I understand that. And I also understand, even though I get frustrated with this, but I'm just not going to play the game. I'm just not going to play the game, right? But what I don't understand is what I see all over Twitter amongst I call it left Cath Twitter, leftish, leftist Catholics on Twitter. I don't even really know what that means, but fine, I'll allow it. And they're all the usual suspects, and they say crazy things like America elected a rapist because our pastors said we had to. That was one that I saw. Austin Ivory, the biographer of Pope Francis, immediately, within 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So this was in the evening for whatever, he's in England or what have you in the UK, calls it a white lash, right? That the election of Donald Trump is white supremacy or something, right? That you had people like Mickens say, this is about white supremacy and this, and the U.S. Catholic bishop said nothing, and I am flabbergasted by that reaction. Like, I really am.
It's beyond risible.
It really is pretty low resolution, and I think it's safe to say that Kamala Harris, apologies, really believes abortion is good. Or I'll be nice. Access to abortion is good and
up
important.
To and beyond the point of birth.
And important. I think she thinks it's important. Okay. And I think she really cannot stand the fact that Catholic hospitals have carve-outs under the auspices of religious liberty.
Yeah, she said she would eliminate that.
Yeah. Now, it's not like Donald Trump understands any of these issues, right? He does not understand IVF. I think he's basically one of these 6 to 10 to 12 week guys when it comes to abortion. So all that. So again, I'm not enthusiastic about any of these things, I assure you. But I don't understand what exactly do they hang their hats on then for Kamala being pro Kamala?
The lefty Catholics.
That's what I'm getting at.
I think it's simple. I think they legitimately despise her stand on abortion. I think most leftist Catholics have a gut level antipathy towards prenatal homicide, and I will grant them that. When people like a National Catholic Reporter or America Commonwealth Austin Ivory say I'm opposed to abortion, you know what? I believe them. Okay. Nevertheless, they bracket it off as a sort of non-issue in the sense that what can the president really do about it these days anyway? Maybe Supreme Courts or whatever. Anyway. Yeah. Therefore they valorize issues like immigration. I think they're very, very pro-immigration.
Well, I'd love to talk about that, but keep going.
Yeah, they valorize I also think they have, they're statists. They believe in big state solutions.
Okay.
So they're welfare state socialist type people. Okay, fine. That's what they are. And they believe the Democrats will eventually deliver to us universal health care, cradle to grave welfare state, Nordic state sort of welfare state kind of stuff. And there's a certain appeal to that. I'm not necessarily opposed. I mean, I'm opposed to the Leviathan of the state, as was Dorothy Day, but there's a part of me that says, okay, I can see how a reasonable person would think that those are noble ideals the Democratic Party used to stand for anyway. And therefore I'm going to stand with that, and I'm not going to make abortion and then you have Donald Trump come along, who has all of these personality quirks, and the January 6th thing really was kind of bad, and he's also kind of a loose cannon, and so they look at him and say, well, gosh, he's a man of very nefarious character, and I think the Democrats are better on these issues over here, so I'm going to vote for them. And so, okay, I want to sort of turn down the heat and say, okay, I will grant them sincerity. Nevertheless, in the post-mortem on the election, when they turn around and even before, to say that if you support Trump, you're a fascist, you're a Hitler sympathizer, all this kind of stuff. This, when they engage in that kind of overheated rhetoric, or when they say this is misogyny, this is racism, this is a white lash. By the way, I don't know who Van Johnson said in 2016 when Trump won that was a white lash. So Austin Ivory is getting that from Van Johnson.
You mean Van Jones?
Van Jones, yeah. I'm sorry, not Van Johnson. I get that's a singer. Van Jones, yeah. And anyway, I would say just one thing to Austin, but I'll get back. Let me finish this. I'll give 2 words to Austin Ivory saying that this is a white lash. 2 words, shut him up. Barack Obama. Catholics overwhelmingly voted for Barack Obama.
Right.
So if Catholics are all into white supremacy, why did we vote twice for the first black president of the United States? Why is that?
Right.
Obviously, there must be other factors in play then as to why we didn't like Kamala Harris. Right? Because we liked Barack Obama. I don't mean me. I mean Catholics as an electorate liked Barack Obama, who is half black, a black man.
Right.
How can you then turn around and say that not voting for Kamala Harris is evidence of white racist Catholics? I don't get that.
Right.
Maybe it's got to do with the fact that she's an empty suit, an airhead, a nitwit, an anti-Catholic bigot. Maybe it's got something to do with that.
I think she. No, I know. I guess. One of my friends often says that if you don't have religion, I tweeted something out about this earlier today. If you don't have religion, then politics kind of becomes your religion, and I think there's some real truth to that, right? I think that, so that's why I get a little confused about. That's why I get a little confused about the enthusiasm of the left Cath crew, because they seem to be enthusiastic in ways that are religious, and they seem to get more enthusiastic about voting for a Democrat in the United States of America than like real spiritual matters. In fact, their whole world seems to be oriented toward the world, in ways that I find confusing.
Well, when you bring together that their leftist politics with their approach to the Catholic Church,
and that's what I can't get out of my head, right?
It's horizontalist thinking.
It's totally flat.
They don't think theologically; they think sociologically.
Right.
They don't even think historically. They think sociologically. Everything gets reduced into these politico-socio categories, both intra-ecclesially and then in secular politics.
Right.
And so it's almost as if secular politics becomes a kind of ecclesiology by a different name. And so, they get it all invested in it on this almost religious level. I'll add one other thing too. Why I think lefty Catholics support the Democratic Party with a kind of religious fervor. I mentioned before that most of them are opposed to abortion, and I think they are. Nevertheless, it's the only aspect of the sexual revolution that they don't love. I think that lefty Catholics are completely on board the Democratic Party's sort of baptizing of the sexual revolution. It's very, very clear they support all the gay agenda and all that kind of stuff, that they don't think that there's anything any longer called a sexual sin outside of rape.
I was just going to ask you that. I was just going to ask you that again, not to be to fixate on that, but is this too boyish of a question for me to ask? But I'll ask it. Do they believe that sex outside of marriage is wrong?
No, they don't. They don't.
I can't believe I've never thought about
what they would believe is the typical sort of thing that the average decent, and they're decent secular. I have tons of secular friends, and they're wonderful people. And yet their attitude towards sex is, as long as it's between 2 consenting adults and you're not harming anyone, then there's nothing immoral about it.
So my appreciation. So I'm just to speak bluntly about my perspective on those kinds of matters is that if I have sex with anyone outside of my marriage, and before I was married, that not only is that a violation of sort of God's commandment, but that it absolutely does matter. And in
Yeah.
participating in that,
Yeah.
I'm offending God and risking cutting myself off from the source of my being. And it doesn't matter if she really wanted to do it too, right? Or
Yeah.
I really
Yeah.
wanted to do it too. Like, well, of course I
Right.
want to do it. Like, what? Like, but that it actually matters. Like, it's consequential. It's there's in my world, there's no such thing as no harm, no foul, because the harm is in the transgression itself.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Yeah.
Even if I'm engaging in an activity with another person who's willing to do it too.
Oh, amen, brother. You're preaching. Yeah. Because,
Right. I mean, so
yeah.
how can you miss how can you just sort of explain, and I don't think I'm making anything up, right? I think I'm giving voice
Because
to
I think,
what I was
yeah.
taught and what the church has taught since, like, forever.
Well, I think it's got to do, once again, the fact that they think sociologically in a horizontalist direction. And
So
so
do they believe in heaven, Larry? Do they
oh,
believe in an
yeah. Well,
afterlife?
I
Do they
think,
believe
yeah.
in metaphysics?
Yeah, well, metaphysics, I don't know, but I think most liberal Catholics that I know certainly believe in heaven. I don't think
Okay.
many of them believe in hell, but they believe in heaven, and they
Okay.
believe in some
Okay.
sort of eschatological vision of the kingdom and all the.
Okay.
And I'll say this too.
Really?
I said
Okay.
before.
All
I
right.
said before that they believe that sex is okay as long as it's consenting adults and no one gets harmed. They will often throw in the caveat, it should be in a committed long-term relationship
But,
of
like, what
some
does that
kind.
even
What does
mean,
that
Larry?
that's ass covering. That's just BS, because they don't believe, even in the context
Right.
of marriage, that marriage is permanent. They all
Right.
believe in divorce and remarriage. The church ought to okay all that. So permanence is not in any way, shape, or form a part and parcel of their notion of committed relationship. So then it just becomes a sliding scale of how permanent, they would all probably be opposed to just hookup culture and one night stands.
But why?
But
Why?
because
There's no leg to stand on, so to speak.
but I think the why would be that they do believe that most lefty Catholics do believe there is still some connection between sex and love, and that
But what about sex and meaning? What about sex and
oh well,
meaning?
yeah, no, it doesn't have to necessarily mean anything beyond the fact that I'm nurturing love. If I'm in love with somebody or have an infatuation with somebody and I'm romantically involved with somebody and we're committed to one another on some vague, nebulous level, then sex is maybe not ideal, but it's okay. It's not immoral. So once again, to go back, they're thinking sociologically, they're comparing it to, say, the pre-Vatican II Catholic Church, when sex was apparently allegedly taboo and you didn't talk about it, and nobody was allowed to get divorced, and spousal abuse was hidden and covered up, and child abuse was hidden and covered up, and everybody was committing sexual sins, but nobody wanted to talk about it. At least now it's all out in the open and we can finally stop being hypocrites about it. So it's on this kind of a silly, superficial level.
So what do they tell their kids, man? Like, what do they tell their kids?
I think they tell their children to be responsible. I think
Safe?
that's what, yeah,
The
safe,
sort of
which means safe.
the patois of safe.
Yeah, safe and so forth. And, are you ready? Only have sex when you're ready. Only have sex when you do it safely, and so on. I think that's just what they
Okay.
teach their kids for the most part. But you know what? I don't have any sociological data or studies
So
in front of me that would
my
vindicate that.
crazy theory about that then is that is just a way to accelerate unbelief.
Oh, it sure is, because let's go back to why this is important. St. Paul, when he's talking to Christians about what they're allowed or not allowed to do in terms of dietary laws or whatever, he says to them, when you're out amongst the pagans, there's no need to be this hyper Judaizer kind of person, but you do need to, in a sense, avoid two things. Okay. And you need to avoid, eating, animals that have been sacrificed, the blood of
Right, right,
animals.
right, right.
And you need to avoid, what else did he say, Cale? Sexual immorality,
Right, right.
porneia. You need to avoid.
Right.
So isn't it interesting? Because what he is equating is sexual immorality with idolatry.
Right.
My colleague
Right.
Rodney Hauser is
So
very,
good.
very good on this. He has pointed this out on numerous articles where St. Paul equates sexual immorality with idolatry. In fact, do you not know your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit?
That's right.
So when you engage in improper sexual activity, you are blaspheming. You're engaging in an act of idolatry and blaspheming against your own body as a temple of the Holy Spirit. We can get into all kinds of natural law forms of argumentation, but you're absolutely right, Cale, when you said, when we say, as long as nobody gets hurt, there's hurt in the very transgression. This is the gospel. Okay. The gospel is you're hurting yourself in the very transgression involved, and therefore engaging in an act of idolatry.
Right. Because, to me, on like this sort of this deep, maybe it's just on a deep intuitive level that, and I want to be very clear, to you and to the folks listening right now. I'm really not a hyper scrupulous guy. Like I'm not like I don't I'm not a bean counter when it comes to these kinds of things. It's like, I don't keep spreadsheets of how long it's been since my last confession, and I confess these 13 things, and then I just, that's not the way my mind works. It's not the way that for me, it's like I know when I'm separating myself from my Savior, and therefore I need to repair. Like I know it, and so just full disclosure here, but I'm just not prepared to pretend like what I do with my body doesn't matter, and every time I read again, and it's like, one should be merciful, of course, and one should be understanding, of course, like all those necessary caveats I feel like I have to say, but I also just can't sit here and pretend that if you are shacking up with your girlfriend for the better part of 5 years of her adult life and not committing to her, but you're all too willing to take her body as frequently as she will allow it. Like I'm just not prepared to look a man in his face and say, you're right, that doesn't matter. Like I think it really does matter, like painfully matter. And because we are image bearers, like it actually matters what I'm doing, even within the context of consent. It matters because I am imaging and modeling a violation to my lover in that moment, even, right? So it's just
it goes back to John Paul's theology of the body, which is essentially him saying that our bodies have a sacramentality about them.
Right.
And therefore a language. Our bodies have their own language. Sex is one of the body's languages for communicating the truth of who we are. Right. And that has to involve, therefore, the entirety of the Christian anthropological vision of what are people for, as Wendell Berry says. What are people for?
Right.
But this is also goes back. This is why priests need to be men of letters to at least some extent, men of the mind to at least some extent, because how do you stand up to this tsunami of cultural opinion if you don't have a reservoir of deep spiritual insight drawn from reading things like John Paul and so forth? I would not, as a teacher, when students would say, Dr. Chapp, what do you think about homosexuality? I would not have had the arsenal with which to answer those questions had I not read, had I not studied, had I not prayed about it, had I not thought about it, had I not felt about it, and it's just sad that people don't think anymore. Christians don't think.
Right. In some of the circles that I play around in on the internet, friends of mine, and some of them are logged into the show right now, and we as a group, we have kind of sort of agreed to de-emphasize propositional knowing as a way of kind of getting past some of the historical hangups so that we can know in other ways with each other, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a good exercise. I think that's important. You know, I don't think most people would not say, "Oh, propositions are not important." Of course they are. They're part of our worldview here. But that participatory portion of the economy of salvation is necessarily disrupted when we destroy ourselves sexually,
Yeah.
even with each other, even with consent, right? And maybe this is getting in like mystical places that, you know, I don't know if you want to go there, but I you can feel the rupture in the body in very real ways.
This is why the great destroyer of modern souls is pornography.
Hmm.
It's the
Yeah,
elephant in the.
how about a synod on that? How about
I
a
was just
synod on
going to
that?
say, how about a synod on the ubiquity of
Yeah,
pornography in our society? And
right.
it's the great unspoken thing that
Yeah,
nobody wants to address, the great public health crisis
yeah,
of our society. And it is a public health crisis
yeah,
of our society that nobody wants to address because it utterly degrades people. It degrades them.
yeah.
And it destroys their sense of self, especially Christians who are addicted to pornography.
Hmm.
They are living a lie. And
Hmm.
those listening to me right now who hear these words and you're practicing Catholics and you are addicted to porn and it's your little secret, guilty secret, all right, you need to address that.
Yeah.
You need to address that. I know from talking with priests, I'm sure talking with
Oh,
students,
yeah.
it is a pandemic. It
Right.
is a pandemic.
Well, and I think it's important, you know, why is it a pandemic, and you know, what is it doing, you know, to you, and what is, you know, I think it's just important to kind of work through those things. It is, you know, I did a live stream show rather a couple of weeks back with a guy. It wasn't on my channel. It was another one, and um, we did a show kind of talking about the vampiric quality of pornography, and how it is sort of this sapping of vitality. You know,
Yeah.
and I thought it was a great conversation. You can see it on Twitter. You can, if you hit me up, I'll try to find the link for it. But it's really great. But you're right. It's the scourge that is in the body, right? I mean, I think
Yeah. Oh,
that particular scourge is infecting the body right now. And so, you know, no conversations, you know, about something that I bang on about all the time, which is how are men and women going to get along? Well, they're not going to get along if we continue to have a runaway problem with pornography.
that's exactly right. I have no psychological degrees. I have no psychological insight. I have no psychological studies, but I am firmly convinced that the exponential rise of depression and
Mhm.
suicide and so forth amongst our young people today, which is pandemic, is a result of despair and meaninglessness that they feel at existence. A despair and
Yeah,
meaninglessness
yeah,
that
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
only reinforced by
yeah.
pornography.
Right, right,
Pornography has in its soul a nihilistic,
right.
meaning effacing
Right,
impulse.
because you are in essence saying that this person means nothing.
Nothing.
I mean, you know, what is it? Is it John Paul when he was Karol Wojtyła in Love and Responsibility that he talks about the opposite of love is not hate but use or something like that? You know,
Yeah.
the opposite of love is use, right? That pornography mechanizes our human being, right? So that the other person becomes an extension of my own, you know, libido dominandi, right? That this is not a person I orient, gift, but I take, right? It's sort of this
Yeah.
inherently
Yeah.
acquisitive
Yeah.
vampiric function. um yeah, so anyway, we were talking about this because I was asking you questions about left Caths and their reaction to
The election.
defeat. the defeat of Kamala
Well, this is
Harris
part of
and
it.
the
It's part of the
Democrats.
sexual revolution. I don't think left-wing Catholics have a great I don't think they believe that pornography or the sexual revolution and all. I don't think they think it's any big deal. They even dismissively refer to them. Oh, those are pelvic issues.
Yeah, I've
That's
heard
got
that
what.
phrase before, with pelvic issues. Like
Yeah, tell that to the 400,000 children that
yeah,
the
yeah,
Biden administration cannot account for. They, the liberal Catholics talk about social justice and
yeah,
immigration. I would ask them, where are the 400,000 children that the
yeah,
Biden administration
yeah,
just released into American society, into the hands of coyotes and others who
yeah,
are obviously sex trafficking them?
yeah.
Okay, is that a pelvic issue?
Right.
That's what and who's consuming the pornography that is being produced? Not just, okay, a lot of the kids are going to be trafficked sexually just to have sex for money, as in prostitution rings.
Yeah.
A lot of them are being sex trafficked to create pornographic images.
Right.
Okay, that
And
kid.
participate in satanic rituals and all the thing. I mean, I'll say it. It's
Yes,
true. Everybody
yes,
knows
it
this,
is true. Everybody
right?
knows it.
But
Yes.
what I struggle with, Larry, is I have been told on many occasions that if I support, like, one of the reasons that I'm attracted to President Trump is his stand on immigration, and I have I think a fairly sophisticated take on that. It's not like I haven't thought about it, but that there's something problematic about just having an open border. That it is a violation of my responsibilities to take care of me and my family first, and take on what I can take on. And for them to sort of just open the borders and nationalize a border town, so that now every community in the flyover counties is now a border state.
Yeah.
And it's not xenophobia, it's none of those things that I get accused of being, let's say. But I am doubly disturbed with the way that so-called Catholic relief organizations are working with open borders people, right? Which is facilitating the sex trafficking of
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
of innocent women and children. How do they square that circle? I find it. I feel that there's so much here that needs to be properly uncovered. That these institutions, they just sort of blithely say, like, well, we need to welcome the immigrant, like, just like Joseph and Mary, and they sort of play these really low resolution word games, when they are sort of positioning themselves as the more Christian than thou
Yeah. Yeah.
standpoint. And I honestly, it makes me really upset.
Yeah, it
Really
makes me
upset.
upset too. People accuse me of hey, look, I lived in Latin America for a year. I love Latin American culture. I love
Mhm,
Latinos. I used
mhm,
to speak Spanish fluently, not so
mhm,
much anymore.
mhm.
I mean, I love it. I absolutely love it. And I have no animus against people south of our border whatsoever. And I am actually, believe it or not, I'm not a closed border guy. I'm an Ellis Island descendant of Polish and Italian immigrants.
Yeah,
I say let's have liberal immigration into them. Bring me your tired and huddled masses and all that kind of stuff, but legally and properly and vetted properly with
mhm,
paperwork and documentation. And here's who I am. You don't necessarily have to have a passport, but you need to tell me who you are and where you're going and why you're going there, and
yeah,
those sorts of portal questions that they even asked at Ellis Island. Okay. Do you
yeah.
have tuberculosis? They would ask it. Let's
Right,
do a
right,
tuberculosis test.
right, right,
You
right.
can't come in, things like that. And so we would able to keep track of, where do the children go? Oh, I see
Mhm,
you have 3 kids with you. How are you related to them? Show me documentation of how you're
mhm.
related to them. Where are they going? And
Right, and,
so
and
on.
and the bottom line is we don't have the infrastructure to handle the sheer volume that is coming up through on
No, we
foot
don't.
traffic on the southern border, but nor do we have the resources to handle, being one of these towns in Ohio that gets dumped with 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 people in the span of a couple of months. It's like, again, I have no animus to these people who are seeking a better life. I get it, I really do. But what about the people who live there? I mean, like I find it gross. I find it
Yeah.
gross, and I don't know what the
Yeah.
limiting principle is exactly. And so, if we can't guarantee if we can't guarantee, their safety, then like we're just gonna have to press pause. Like honestly, we're gonna have to press pause until we can figure out what the heck's going on here.
I agree.
Right.
Which
And
is
so
because it's not safe for them.
Right. And to be called a racist and a xenophobic and like anti-Catholic because of this, I honestly, it's really upsetting.
Look,
And
they're grasping.
it's an inversion. It's an inversion.
It is an inversion, and they're grasping it to call us fascists and call Trump Hitler and all. Trump was president for 4 years once. I don't recall goose stepping soldiers around the White House or anything.
You know what? And Larry, to that point, I think that is exactly why, at least so far, we've seen very little, of the kind of marching in the streets and the
riots
and the destruction of the cities. And now maybe that'll happen this weekend. It's very possible. If I had a business, in one of these cities, I might keep my plywood on the windows through the weekend just to try
who knows?
just to make sure. I mean, who knows?
So far, you're right. But I think it's part of this because not even lefties, despite their rhetoric, really cared for Kamala Harris that much.
Yeah, I think that's right. I
mean, when you look at the fact that Joe Biden got 80-something million votes in 2020, and she got 61 or 2 million votes, she got 20 million less votes. That means there was no Democrat-based turnout for her.
Where are those 20,000 votes? That's so
20
weird.
million. 20 million.
Right. Where are those?
The votes? Conspiracy theory types are saying, see there, that only goes to what you actually, if you look at the number of votes that Obama got, and so it's right around the same number of votes that Kamala Harris
this year.
Yeah, it's the strange outlier is actually Joe Biden in 2020 getting 80-some million votes. Yeah. Nobody's ever gotten that many.
No, it's crazy.
Where did they come from? So you can either say that was cheating went on and his votes were inflated, or there was no groundswell of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris this time around.
So I'll say one more thing about the election personally, why I breathed a sigh of relief on Wednesday morning. And that's what it was for me, right? Is that, I have a boy, who's, almost 15 years old. And, in 3 years, he's going to be, he's going to go to the post office and register for the draft. And I am sick to death of this country's unwillingness to take a look at itself seriously about these forever whatever wars. And I don't think that it's impossible for us to see war in the next 4 years. But I know that the chances of us blithely sending our boys to die is a lot less today than it was my fears were on Monday and Tuesday.
What's interesting, oh boy, I couldn't agree more. My wife Carrie is a big believer in, one of the things she does like about Donald Trump is that she does believe that he will keep us out of these wars, and there is some evidence that he will. Now look, I remember, I'm 66. I remember growing up, and I remember, it was the era of the Vietnam War, and lefties, including lefty Catholics, were very anti-war. I mean, the Catholic worker movement of which I was, Dorothy Day, very anti-military industrial complex, anti-war. Totally. This is what liberals were known for. More conservative Catholics, they were known as the war hawk Catholics or whatever. The liberal Catholics were. But now look what's happened. My goodness, this is it shows is evidence of the fact that the Democratic Party, it really kind of began with McGovern in 72, but the Democratic Party has morphed from being the party of the working class and the blue collar worker, and which is why the immigrants and the Catholics are all for it.
Right.
It morphed from that into the globalist party, the globalist fraternity party, or whatever you want to call it, the United Nations NGO party.
Yeah.
And so that means this is why they have suddenly shifted now to being the war party. Because the globalist agenda demands these kinds of interventionist wars in the name of this sort of globalist sort of
the rules-based international order. Yes, I agree, Larry. And so
in a bizarre way, Trump's nationalism, Trump's America Firstism, you can dismiss it as a kind of isolationist, tariff-inducing sort of thing, but in reality, it's very much an anti-war kind of stance.
I think it is too. And look, I put this on Twitter the other day, and as a younger man, I was very angry with 9/11, and I was
Oh yeah,
frustrated
we all were.
to my core about the terrorist attack upon the United States of America, New York City, and
Oh,
all of that.
I was. Let's go bomb the shit out of whoever did this kind
Yeah,
of a
yeah,
guy.
yeah. So, so,
Me.
so,
Yeah,
so, full disclosure. I mean, I was,
yeah.
I,
Me.
I
That was
wanted,
me.
I wanted retribution, and so
Yeah,
I let the elites of my country talk me. I gave. It was my fault, but I was for the invasion of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. I believe that he had weapons of mass destruction. I believe that he was part of the mastermind behind 9/11 and this sort of international network of terror. I believed Bush. I believed Cheney, and I believed Powell. I really did. And boy, talk about egg and face, right? So,
yeah.
I will again, not that I think that Donald J. Trump is a perfect man, but I know that he, one of the things that he regularly talks about is not doing that kind of stuff. And he gave, people like me permission to say, you know what, that was wrong. That shouldn't have happened. And I'm not going to apologize for that. So look, I teach high school kids, and the
Yeah.
thought of them being, conscripted and drafted to go fight in Russia or Ukraine, as horrified as I am about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I'm not there, man. I'm just not in the place where, yeah, sure, let's go ahead and ship off the
Yeah,
boys
yeah. See,
to do what exactly? What, like walk into a tactical nuclear strike? Like what are we even talking about here? How
yeah.
are
I
we
don't.
even getting to this
I
place?
know the thing is what we need geopolitically. The fear isn't that I think we're going to have boots on the ground in Ukraine. I think the fear is that the Ukrainian war is a tripwire for a broader war, where the Russians decide, well, we need to invade Lithuania. Maybe we need to take
Yeah,
parts of Poland,
yeah,
and at which point NATO has to get involved. At which point you're going to see American boots on the ground,
yeah,
which is why we need to nip the Ukrainian war in the bud right now
right,
and realize this has been a stupid war from the get-go. Zelensky had an
right,
opportunity early on to make peace
right,
with the Russians,
right,
and he
right.
didn't.
Well,
Uh,
we, the United States of America and the State Department, um, uh, pushed back and said, "Don't
yeah,
settle."
don't make
Right?
peace.
And
Don't
and
make
and
peace.
look,
Yeah,
I mean, Larry, the optics of Cheney's daughter joining forces with Kamala Harris and the
yeah.
Democrats, passing themselves off as, like the adults are now back in charge. Like, do they not understand the optics of that?
Well, and also, do they think we're stupid and don't remember history when they thought Dick Cheney was evil incarnate? You
Oh,
remember those days
oh,
in the Bush
amen, brother.
administration. Dick
Absolutely.
Cheney, the left, people like Kamala Harris thought Dick Cheney was the most evil human being who
Right,
walked the face of the earth.
right,
These neocon jerks that have
right.
dragged us into
That's
this
right.
horrific for the sake of Halliburton and for the sake of
Right, right, right,
lining
right, right.
Cheney's pockets, for the
Yeah,
sake of
and
corporate,
and
yeah.
and the
Ah,
funny thing about it is, like, I actually think they're kind of right now.
they were right.
So yeah,
I mean, I was
yeah,
totally opposed
yeah,
to all of that.
yeah, yeah.
Unlike you, I did. I was in
That's
favor of
smart.
invading Afghanistan, but not Iraq,
Sure. Yeah,
because Afghanistan is where Osama bin Laden was,
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Anyways, but nevertheless, that's exactly what Dick Cheney was, and that's what they. But now Liz Cheney is now, because she's useful politically as this. But I think it actually hurt Kamala Harris and helped Trump. That
I
a
think
war
so
hawk.
too. Yeah,
Trump was absolutely right when he referred to her as a war hawk,
yeah.
because it's exactly what her entire family has always been.
So
So yeah, the fact is we need. I mean, I'm a Catholic worker. I'm opposed to war. I'm
yeah,
opposed to the military-industrial complex,
right.
and
And
it's
and,
one of
and
the
so
things
so
I do
people have
like
asked
about
me,
Trump.
right? And so people have asked me, is like, well, what, how could you, how could you be for this crazy man? And honestly, it's all in this vein right here. That it is some kind of check against what I think of as the machine or the Leviathan state. It is the blob, it is the bureaucracy, whatever you want to call this thing, right? And I sincerely believe, I don't think that Trump is some sort of magic man. I don't think like, oh, and now like
No,
everything is going to be good and blah blah. No, please, please. I am so beyond all of that. but I see this as at least a little bit of a reprieve from the total state. I really do think that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that he's Hitler. I don't. I think that he's a flawed man, but I think he gives us a better shot for a lot of different things. Securing the border, making sure that that's sane. And honestly, it's this war thing. It's a really, really big deal for me. And I need to repent of my former sort of rah military adventurism. Like that was disgusting then, and I should have been a better man then to understand what was happening. I was not, but now I am. I'm too old now to sort of do the fool me twice thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I like Russia. I don't actually like Russia or the Putin regime. I don't like any of that stuff. But I think it's time to be real about what is going on. And I think that Harris and her ilk do not understand that, or just have a maybe they understand it, but they have a difference of opinion about how we are to proceed. And so therefore,
I agree. Camille Paglia, the atheist lesbian pundit, in 2016 excoriated Democrats who were pro-Hillary. She hated Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And she excoriated Democrats on the grounds that the Democratic Party has become the war party and that Hillary Clinton is a warmongering BI from hell. And Camille Paglia said, look, the deal is this: Democrats have morphed into the party of gay and the party of transgenderism and the party of abortion. And she said, as long as a Democratic candidate will promise you unlimited abortions and drag queen bathrooms for 8-year-olds, you're going to get the Democratic vote. And it doesn't matter what a warmongering jerk you might be. You're going. So my point is that we need to. Whenever, for example, you'd see people on the street asking people, "Who are you going to vote for?" And they say, "Oh, Kamala Harris," and they would say, "Why?" "Oh, abortion, LGBTQ." I mean, this is inevitably the first things out of the mouth of most Democrats as to what they fear Trump is going to do. Right. He's going to eliminate abortions and he's going to curtail LGBTQ rights. Oh my God! All right. So my point is this. The failure of the media, the failure of the mainstream press, the fourth estate, right, is such a monumental thing that people are, I think, not paying enough attention.
Amen.
Not enough because look at this Liz Cheney thing, and if instead of lionizing Liz Cheney, look, even Republicans are supporting Kamala Harris. What does this say about Donald Trump? They should have held Kamala Harris's feet to the fire, and they should have said, look, you support Biden's forever war in Ukraine. You support the war in Israel's forever war against Gaza and Iran and everybody, regardless of what you think, you support those wars. All right. And now you are eliciting the support of a woman. All right. Related to Dick Cheney, one of the biggest warmongers this place. So, Miss Harris, what has become of the Democratic Party's peace stance? Are you a war hawk? Are you a pro-war presidential candidate? They should have held her feet to the fire about that endorsement and says, what does this endorsement mean in light of the fact that you support all these wars? All right. But no, they're not going to, because the media too simply was obsessed with abortion and transgenderism. That's what the media cared about too, and that's why they're opposing Donald Trump,
because they thought it would work. I mean,
exactly. But it also shows how dishonest they are, and the propagandists. We need to get that Trump is such an existential threat to democracy. We need to get Kamala Harris elected, which means, though, even though she is a member of an administration that's a warmongering administration, all right, we're not going to hold her feet to the fire. We're not.
Right.
And that to me was the big thing about the Liz Cheney endorsement was, where is the outrage that a Cheney has endorsed a Democratic
no kidding. So Larry, the one question that I really wanted to get to, and I forgot until you just reminded me, but we don't have time for it. But I'm going to say the question, but then I want to talk a little bit about Vance, because my friend Phlebas in the comments has been asking. I think this is a good question, especially in the context of this sort of Catholic conversation that we're having today. But was this is like, how much do you think this is? I keep thinking of two images in my head, and the first image is a still between from a black and white still from a television camera featuring JFK and Nixon in the 1960 debate. And then the other image that I put next to it on Twitter was a picture of Donald Trump talking to Joe Rogan. And I just really would love to sort of get your thoughts, maybe at another time, just about that image. Is this signaling a different kind of thing? And how much do you think was Harris affected because she did not want to go on a 2-hour, 3-hour podcast?
Well, I think she was very affected by that. And one of the things that I love about the internet, one of the things I do love about alternative media and so forth, despite the fact, yes, there's a lot of misinformation that gets out.
But look what you and I are doing right now.
But exactly what it does, it has broken the hegemony of the mainstream media. I mean, the fact is, information flowed to the American public, flowed through about 6 or 7 choke points.
Right.
For most of the time we were growing up. Walter Cronkite, whatever, those were the choke points. And Hillary Clinton has said it herself, we don't regulate these social media, we'll lose all control. Well, yeah, they had control of those things. So now there's no control and they're upset about it. But guess what? That's free speech. That's free speech. Absolutely. And you always run the risk of misinformation with free speech.
And so
that's what it is.
Right. So to use this frame as a way to talk about J.D. Vance, so fascinating, right? J.D. Vance, Ohio, he's a Rust Belt kid, makes good, goes to Yale, blah, 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 the whole bit, survives a tumultuous upbringing and and becomes a senator. And now he is a Catholic convert who has, ascended to the vice president elect. And if you notice that when he was first announced, the mainstream media with their hit pieces and their sound bites were able to temporarily frame him as weird, strange, and anti-woman.
That's right.
I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah. Childless cat ladies and all that stuff.
Right, and all that sort of stuff. Now, what is so interesting to me is that yet, if anybody has seen him on a podcast, a more than 20-minute podcast, let's say, there is nothing strange about this guy. He's incredibly normal. He's incredibly bright, clearly. And you saw that during the debate, right?
I was just going to say, I think that actually the high point of the election, and high point in the sense of the turning point, was Vance's debate with Tim Walz.
I think so.
He made Tim Walz look like the fool that Tim Walz is. Right. And J.D. Vance clearly came across as the intelligent adult in the room.
That's right.
Now, I didn't agree with everything that J.D. Vance said, and I don't agree with everything that he stands for. But he is exactly what you said: intelligent, articulate, forceful, poised, mature, normal. Okay, Tim Walz is the weirdo.
That's what's so strange. I mean, my goodness, if you spent, that became abundantly clear. I mean, they buried Tim Walz leading up to the debate and after the debate. You just saw none of it. I mean, he's just a weird dude, like truly a weird dude. It's a couple of hilarious smash up videos that you can find on Twitter with him. Like,
hey, look, Kamala Harris, I think, would be president of the United States today if she'd picked Shapiro as her.
I do too. I think that there's a much better chance. Right, there's a much better chance.
Yeah, let's put it that way. A much better chance.
But what do you think of Vance? You already mentioned that you have some sort of disagreements with him, and whatnot. But what do you think of him just as a Catholic convert and all that? I mean, it's a weird moment, right? We have a Catholic vice president for the first time.
Yeah, I really I'm interested in the fact that he does seem interested in certain post-liberal Catholic thinkers.
Yeah.
He seems to have a post-liberal, in other words, he's intellectual enough, intelligent enough to understand what post-liberalism means. I did an interview, and what's important about this is this. I did an interview a few months ago with a theologian named David Dean, who's written a great book called The Tyranny of the Banal, or the Banal, right?
Right.
And one of the things he said in the interview, which is so interesting, is this: because if you think the post-Christian left is scary, just wait until you see what the post-Christian right is like. Okay. And I think that's an extremely insightful and important thing to point out. There is an anarcho right-wing side to the conservative movement that is post-Christian, nihilistic, Nietzschean, that is scary as hell, frightening as hell, really is kind of racist and white supremacist and all this kind of stuff. And so I think it's very important, very, very important for Catholics who think in post-liberal ways to make sure
Yeah.
that wing of the conservative movement does not gain ascendancy. We have to articulate a deeper and profounder post-liberal vision than the post-liberal right or the post-liberal left. And this is why I think J.D. Vance is not understood very well by the media, because the media thinks entirely still in the categories of liberalism.
Yeah.
They equate post-liberalism with authoritarianism, with white nationalism, and fine.
I thought Rod had a really good piece in the European Conservative where he talks about that Trump and Harris represent. It's no longer an argument about liberalism or not liberalism. These are really two different visions or versions of post-liberalism, and I thought that was really insightful. And I think that you're right about the sort of the edge cases about the post-liberal right. I mean, I remember Doubt that I think said something along those lines, that if you think you dislike the religious right, wait until you see the irreligious right. And I think that's exactly right.
Exactly right.
But my what I see in somebody like Vance, and I've listened to podcasts with him, and clearly, he's a sharp guy and he reads. To our point earlier, I mean, this is a man who reads. I'm not so sure how much the other three candidates in this race read a book ever. Vance clearly is a reader. It just oozes out of him, right? And
Obama was a reader.
Fair enough. Fair enough. No. I was meaning in this cycle.
No, but no, I was just tossing that out there. JFK was a reader. Obama was a reader, but I don't think Kamala Harris or Donald Trump are readers.
And I know that people would expect me, I bang on all the time about reading old books. You're a theologian, you talk about old books too. And I know people would expect me to say, I want a president who reads books, but I really think it's important, again, referencing the earlier part of our conversation. But my sense about Vance is that I think his conversion to Catholicism, and like all converts, right, these things take time to mature and to tease out. I mean, all those sort of things. So I'm cautiously optimistic about him. I even though I sort of make it a swear never to stand up for a politician. In this instance, I think that I am optimistic about him because I think his conversion to Catholicism was the way in which he grounded his instincts into something more real. And in many respects, I think that it is a perfect move for young men in particular who understand this other spirit that needs to be properly tamed and channeled. And so I see his conversion as exactly that, kind of saving him from some of these sort of more outlandish, much more explicitly Nietzschean expressions.
Which is a path he could have gone down.
Absolutely.
Because he was clearly, he had this entrepreneurial element to him, and he made a lot of money, and he leaned on some wealthy people to help him make a lot of money, so he could have easily gone down the sort of Nietzschean nihilistic path of money and power and and all those things, but he seems not to have through his conversion. But he's hated by the Catholic left.
I mean, they loathe him.
They dredge up his wealth and how he got his wealth, and
it's like they're playing boogeyman games, right?
They really are. But they have no problem with Kamala Harris visiting the border wearing a $62,000 Gautier necklace, which they didn't bring up.
Hilarious. I love it so much. So and I think that somebody like Vance, at least the way he strikes me, and this is sort of brings up the podcast part of this conversation that I know that I really would love to talk to you about it, but here we are, and I'm going to do it. If you've got a few more minutes, I'd like to do it.
I got all night. It's already past my dinner time, so I'm just gonna. That's so okay. So I'm here for
green light.
That's right. Yeah.
So when you do like what we're doing right now. Okay, so we've been going on, we've been going for 2 hours and 4 minutes and 19 seconds and counting. Okay, so we've been going for a while now.
Yeah. I hope people are still listening.
No, I've got 190 people on here. This is great.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us.
Yeah. So, right. I appreciate everybody. What is striking to me is that, we've been doing this now for 2 hours, and if somebody's watching at home, like I think they have a pretty good sense of like who you and I are. I just do.
Yeah, I hope
Because
so.
you're talking and you're sort of speculating out loud and you're sort of reacting to each other. Like there's nowhere to hide with this, right? I don't even have any fancy branding and songs and music to sort of distract people. Like this is just like straight up you and I doing our thing back and forth. Only real, and it sounds so arrogant, but I'm going to say it. Only real people can do this. Okay. People who are
Yeah.
fabricated in a lab for sound bites and looks at a podium and clips here and there, they simply cannot do this if that's what they were made for. And so go like watch JD Vance talk to Theo Vaughn. It's like he's just a real person.
Yeah.
And I would say this,
Yeah.
not about JD, but also about Trump. Like I watched some of those podcasts that he did with some of these guys, and he's just like a real person. He's
I
just,
think,
you know what I mean?
I think it was our friend Steve Skojak who mentioned on Twitter. He says, "Gosh, I wish Trump would do more of these.
Yeah.
Just like because these sit down interviews because he's so good at it. He's very repetitious. It was the greatest interview ever. I was the greatest,
right.
greatest economy of all time. His hyperbolic. I'm the greatest thing since Caesar.
Right.
Right. Kind of stuff. But still, he could do it. He could sit and expositate for 2 hours.
That's right. And honestly, if you saw any of that Rogan interview, you're like, man, this guy's actually thought about some things. Like this is not, the knuckle dragging orange Hitler that I was led to believe, right? And I think it is a vastly overrated platform. And that I do believe that it will change the political landscape. I think it'll change things at the national level first, right? It's going to change things up there, and I think it's going to trickle down. It's just going to be a matter of like where the platforms for the state and local races and all that sort of stuff. Because I think at the end of the day, we still, it's so interesting. We still want somebody who's real, and I think that Harris's refusal to do any media for an entire month once she secured the nomination from however she did all that. I mean, who knows, right? She didn't do media for an entire month, Larry. She didn't talk to a reporter for an entire month. Okay, so that's on her, man. That's on her. And then, not going on Rogan, in part, I'm kind of sympathetic to her because I don't think she could do Rogan. I think she's been so rehearsed her entire career.
He would have made mincemeat out of her.
Well, and I think she would. But honestly, I think Rogan would have been kind of gentle with her. I really do. I've seen enough of him.
No, you're probably right. Yeah,
but I
actually thought that he was pretty softball with Trump too.
But if you see his stuff, that's kind of how he is. He'll look. If he feels like you're lying straight up to him, that's when I've seen him pounce. Right.
Yeah.
And Joe Rogan, for all of his muscles and UFC stuff, the dude's really bright, and he's really, if EQ is a thing, if there's such a thing as emotional intelligence, the brother's got it.
People often say to me with regard to my podcast that I'm sometimes too easy on my guests. When a guest will say something that I clearly disagree with, and I just kind of get quiet and I don't say anything, and I move on to a different topic because I feel like being a gracious host. I get that, and I think that's what Joe Rogan did with Trump. You could tell there were a few times when Rogan wanted to maybe say, I don't know about that, but he just kind of moved on to something else. Maybe out of respect or something. But could Kamala Harris have done that for a few hours? I don't know. Look, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, Trump, yeah, and Kamala Harris. But the fact is, I opposed Hillary Clinton and I opposed Kamala Harris. It's got nothing to do with the fact that I don't want a woman to be president of the United States. I would be thrilled to have a woman to be president of the United States. I'd be thrilled to have a black woman be president of the United States, or whatever. The fact is, send us then a candidate, a female candidate, whether it's a white female or a female of color, who's worthy of our vote. Send us somebody who isn't an empty suit war hog like Hillary Clinton,
right.
Or an even emptier suit in Kamala Harris. And I say that understanding that, the male candidates are often also empty suits, but I oppose them as well, and so send us.
Yeah, obviously. Yes, obviously.
Send us a woman of substance. For example, I wasn't a huge fan of Margaret Thatcher, But if you sent us the American equivalent of Margaret Thatcher,
Right.
if she had run in 1980 against Jimmy Carter instead of Ronald Reagan, she might damn well have been president of the United States.
Right.
And it would have proven we're not misogynist. Just send us the right woman to run for president and we'll vote for her.
So do you think, and maybe we can, as my friend Paul Vanderklay would say, land the plane. Do you think, are you as bully on podcasts and the future as I am?
Yeah, I am. And I used to be very opposed to all of this stuff.
Yeah.
For example, when I was still teaching in the classroom and all of a sudden distance learning became a thing and learning classes over the internet became a thing. Oh my God, I was so opposed to it, so completely opposed to it. This is disincarnational. How do you keep people from cheating? Blah, blah, blah. And I still think there is still a great, great place for in-class instruction.
Oh yeah, same.
Old-fashioned talking head lecturer that becomes your mentor, and you develop
chalk on the hands.
You develop a relationship with that kind of teacher for the 4-year college. I'm not opposed to that, but also, this explosion of the university of the internet is both a great danger because there is all kinds of nonsense out there, but it's also presenting us with the greatest opportunity for learning that the world has ever seen. Even something like when I moved to this farm, I didn't know anything about farming. My wife calls me the YouTube farmer because everything I wanted, I thought, well, how do I butcher a chicken, or what's the best way to grow tomatoes? You go on YouTube and somebody shows you how to do that.
That's right.
It's like, wow.
And that's the tremendous upside, to the medium, right? And so for me, the piece that I've made with this, like what we're doing right now, YouTube, etc., is that it's for me, it is a liminal space by which to connect with information and people that I would otherwise not have access to.
That's right. You and I wouldn't know each other.
No, absolutely. And we would, and this is all a prelude to us breaking bread and sharing bourbon together, right?
Well, let me give a concrete example of this. I mean, last weekend I was at Notre Dame for the Nicholas Center's Catholic Imagination Conference. I wish you had been there. It's like Catholic Woodstock. I should have been there. It's like Catholic Woodstock. 1,200 people were there. And the fact is, oh my goodness, I can't tell you how many people came up to me. My wife can tell, scores of people came up to me and said, "Oh my God, I love your podcast." It was really affirming to me because I was like, my stupid little blog and my stupid little podcast.
You toil in obscurity and you do your own
it's
thing.
like, okay, I do these things and blah, blah, blah. Maybe 8 people are going to watch. And when I went to this conference, people came, rushing up to blah, blah. Now, I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back, but to point out, to make the point you just made, people that only knew me through the internet and I only knew them through are now my friends.
That's right.
Because I broke bread with them. I actually had a drink with them. I said, let's sit down and have a bourbon. Let's sit down and have a drink. And now we are going to visit with each other. There's a guy up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Bernie Francese.
Bernie, I know Bernie. Bernie's great.
You know Bernie?
I know Bernie.
You know Bernie? How do you know Bernie?
Through this, and he came to a conference here at the Abbey, and so Bernie's fantastic. I love Bernie.
He's donated money to the farm. I met him out at the at the Notre Dame, and
great guy, superb, man. He's
fantastic.
awesome.
But that's what we're talking about here. Right. I would never have known Bernie were it not for this venue.
Well, and just again to sort of to put a bow on it, I read your first piece. The first piece that I read was something about the dung beetle. Do you remember that piece you wrote?
The clerical dung beetle. It was my diatribe against, and Rod Dreher put it on his blog. It was my diatribe against Cardinal McElroy.
Right, and so Rod picked that up. I found it, went to you, and then like within minutes, I read the piece. I reached out to you and say, "Man, we got to get together." And, I'd love to have interview on the podcast. And that's how our relationship began. And, I wouldn't have been able to do that, right? I mean, and sort of this extension. I think if we see these platforms as extensions, but ultimately, of course, that they help me become better incarnate, more incarnate in my locale, in my space. So
I
that's
think
how
that's the
bring
key.
it.
If there's something a bit disincarnational about these things, but if they are used to, in fact, rebound backwards into a more incarnational encounter, then they will have been fruitful. Then they will have done their job. And let's face it. For example, I write a blog. Before the age of the internet, Dorothy Day was doing the equivalent of writing a blog when she had those
Right,
columns in the Catholic
exactly.
Worker
Yeah.
paper. There's not much that different. It's
No.
electronic versus a piece of paper, but they didn't call them blogs, but that's what she had.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and so I think I do see it as an extension of what we do, and if it affirms, the profundity of our incarnation, I think it does its job. So, all right, look, Larry, I have got to land the plane. I've got to
Yeah,
meet up with my family for dinner here at the
me
Stillman
too.
Dining Hall. And look, I just want to thank you as always. Where can my audience find you? I think they need to find you, Larry. Where can they find you?
Go to my blog page, gaudiumetspes22.com. It's a mouthful, but Gaudium et Spes was a Vatican II document. Gaudiumetspes22.com.
Yeah.
All of my podcasts, all of my writings, all of my various blog posts are at that blog.
And I'd just like to point out that I love the fact that you called your blog Gaudium et Spes. For my non-Catholic friends here, especially from this little corner who are still in the stream, I do appreciate it. Gaudium et Spes is something that you would really like. It is a fantastic introduction to the mind and the heart of the church. So I recommend that. Larry, I'm going to take you off just real quick. If you could hang out, I just want to say goodbye to the audience, and
Sure.
we can wrap things up. All right. Thanks again, Larry. Have a great one.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Audience, thank you so much for coming to this live stream. I went, 2 hours and 16 minutes. I think that's probably a record. We have 195. I saw 198 at one point, so I really do appreciate you logging on. If you would do me the favor to hit the like button, subscribe button, all that kind of stuff, fantastic. I also have a Substack. My Substack is at www.kalezeldin.substack.com. I would love it if you go over there. You can read some of my writings. I do announcements on my newsletter there, so please do that. And until then, you all please take care and have a blessed day. Take care. Bye now.